Prologue. A city on the brink of collapse. The 1980s were a turbulent time for Lebanon. The country was in the midst of a brutal civil war, torn apart by sectarian violence and foreign intervention. Amid the chaos, multinational peacekeeping forces from the United States, France, and other countries entered Lebanon in 1982, hoping to stabilize the war-torn nation. But their presence would be short-lived and catastrophic. On October 23, 1983, two suicide truck bombings targeted the U.S. Marine barracks and the French military headquarters in Beirut. The attacks killed 241 U.S. servicemen and 58 French paratroopers. These bombings were among the deadliest attacks on U.S. forces since World War II and are widely believed to have marked the first major use of suicide bombings in modern history. In the aftermath, suspicion quickly turned toward a shadowy group operating within the tangled web of Lebanese militias, a group that would later become known as Hezbollah. The global stage, a ticking time bomb in Lebanon. Before delving into the specifics of the 1983 bombings, it's essential to understand the geopolitical context. Lebanon was a battleground for influence between regional and global powers. The Iranian Revolution of 1979 had emboldened Shia groups across the Middle East, including those in Lebanon. Iran's newly formed Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, was actively involved in supporting Shia militants, providing training, funds, and ideological guidance. At the same time, Israel had invaded southern Lebanon in 1982, hoping to crush the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, and install a friendly government in Beirut. The United States, France, and other nations deployed peacekeepers to oversee Israel's withdrawal and stabilize the situation. But far from bringing peace, the foreign presence fueled resentment among Lebanese factions, particularly the emerging Shia militias influenced by Iran. The attack on the U.S. Marine barracks, October 23, 1983. At dawn on October 23, 1983, an ordinary-looking yellow Mercedes truck approached the U.S. Marine barracks at Beirut International Airport. Inside the vehicle was a massive bomb, an estimated 12,000 pounds of TNT, ammonium nitrate, and fuel, making it one of the largest non-nuclear explosions ever unleashed. The truck accelerated toward the barracks, crashing through barriers and detonating inside the building. The explosion was so powerful that it lifted the four-story structure off its foundation, instantly killing most of the Marines inside. Within minutes, 241 U.S. servicemen, most of them young Marines, were dead. Rescue workers scrambled to pull survivors from the rubble, but the devastation was overwhelming. The French paratrooper headquarters bombing. Just minutes after the U.S. barracks bombing, another truck bomb targeted the French military headquarters in West Beirut. The second explosion killed 58 French paratroopers. Like the U.S. bombing, the French attack was carefully planned and executed with deadly precision, suggesting a high level of coordination. The simultaneous nature of these attacks raised immediate suspicions of a broader conspiracy. While the attackers were not immediately identified, intelligence agencies soon pointed to a nascent Shia militant network operating under Iranian influence, the precursor to what would later be known as Hezbollah. Hezbollah's origins. Iran's hand in the shadows. In 1982, as Israel occupied southern Lebanon, Iran sent hundreds of IRGC operatives to Lebanon's Bekaa Valley to train and organize local Shia militias. These militias shared Iran's revolutionary ideology and were determined to resist both Israeli occupation and Western influence. Though Hezbollah had not yet formally emerged, the groundwork for the organization was being laid by these Iranian-backed fighters. The bombings of 1983, according to many analysts, were not only acts of revenge against foreign intervention but also part of Iran's broader strategy to project power in the region. U.S. and Israeli intelligence later alleged that Hezbollah operatives, trained and financed by Iran, were responsible for the attacks. The aftermath, U.S. and French withdrawal. The bombings had an immediate and profound impact. For the United States, the attack was a devastating blow, triggering widespread shock and grief. The Reagan administration was forced to rethink its involvement in Lebanon, eventually deciding to withdraw U.S. troops in early 1984. Similarly, France also pulled out its peacekeeping forces. The attacks demonstrated the effectiveness of asymmetrical warfare and suicide bombings, setting a precedent that would be followed by militant groups across the Middle East in the years to come. Hezbollah's ability to force two major powers to withdraw from Lebanon marked a pivotal moment in its rise as a formidable non-state actor. The question of responsibility: was Hezbollah behind the bombings? The question of Hezbollah's involvement in the 1983 Beirut bombings remains a subject of intense debate. Officially, Hezbollah did not exist at the time of the attacks, at least not in its fully organized form. However, many intelligence agencies, including the CIA and Mossad, argue that the group's early operatives, with support from the IRGC, were directly responsible. In 2003, a U.S. federal judge concluded that the bombings were carried out by Hezbollah operatives under Iranian direction. The court awarded damages to the families of the victims, further cementing the belief that the attacks were part of Iran's strategy to expel Western influence from Lebanon. Iran's denials and Hezbollah's silence. Iran has consistently denied any involvement in the 1983 bombings, and Hezbollah has never publicly claimed responsibility. Some argue that the attacks were carried out by smaller Shia factions unaffiliated with Hezbollah, while others believe that the group deliberately kept a low profile to avoid international scrutiny. Regardless of who gave the final order, the bombings served the interests of both Hezbollah and Iran. The attacks forced the United States and France to retreat, leaving the field open for Hezbollah to expand its influence in Lebanon. Legacy and impact. A new era of asymmetrical warfare. The 1983 Beirut bombings marked the beginning of a new era in warfare. They demonstrated the power of suicide attacks and asymmetrical tactics, inspiring other militant groups across the Middle East and beyond. Hezbollah, although not officially acknowledged as the perpetrator, benefited enormously from the attacks, solidifying its role as a major player in Lebanon's political and military landscape. The bombings also reshaped U.S. foreign policy, marking the beginning of a more cautious approach toward military interventions in the Middle East. For the families of the victims, the memory of October 23, 1983, remains a painful reminder of the dangers of foreign intervention and the unpredictable nature of war. Conclusion. A tragedy that changed the course of history. The 1983 Beirut bombings were more than just acts of terror, they were a pivotal moment in the history of the Middle East. Whether or not Hezbollah was directly responsible, the attacks accelerated the group's rise and reshaped the geopolitical landscape of Lebanon. Today, the legacy of those bombings continues to reverberate, influencing how nations approach the challenges of asymmetrical warfare, terrorism, and regional conflicts. Hezbollah's alleged role in the bombings remains a subject of debate, but one thing is certain: the events of that fateful day in October 1983 changed the course of history, leaving scars that are still felt in Lebanon and beyond.